Welcome, everybody, to episode 4 of the Undiscovered Metric. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Emily Gustin, who is the Senior Associate for Business Development, leading LinkedIn's marketing measurement and attribution partnerships. Emily, thank you so much for joining us today. Today, we're going to be talking around, obviously, marketing measurement, attribution models, some of the key metrics that you've talked about in the industry over the last year, especially around mental availability and consideration. But let's jump into it now. So when it comes to marketing measurement, what are the key things that you're seeing marketers look at when they're trying to identify and judge their performances?
So I think there's been actually this really great shift from folks, I think putting an overemphasis, I would say, on metrics that I would describe as more frontline metrics like cost per click or, CTR, click-through rate, to moving towards like these business outcome metrics. And by business outcome, I mean anything that moves your business forward. So that could be, revenue, that could be pipeline generated by your marketing, or it could be something like engagement with priority accounts. So that's where I see the industry kind of focused right now, and I actually think that's a really great shift. It can just be complicated to measure that way because it inevitably, it takes longer to measure those type of interactions. But I think we're heading in the right direction.
You touched upon there a number of different metrics, and you could argue that a lot of CMOs are being overwhelmed by this. We did some research a couple of years ago that found that 40% of CMOs are overwhelmed by the amount of data that they have to look at. And that is because of a number of things, such as the number of marketing sources and touch points has grown exponentially over the last 3 years. But when you're talking to people about measurement, do you think that there are any particular metrics that CMOs are missing when they're looking to demonstrate impact on the bottom line?
Well, just to put a stake in the ground here, I do think that the most important metrics, what you always want to anchor around, again, is that like final outcome that's going to move your business forward. That tends to, at least in my experience with B2B advertisers, that tends to be revenue generation, right? So I think that should always be kind of your North Star. And to simplify things, right? Like a media mix model, actually, it creates kind of a simple view of that. How much is each channel contributing to revenue? So that's just kind of my light guidance there would be North Star is really the key thing that moves your business forward. And you can really tie all of your marketing to that. But what are the metrics that people might be, not emphasizing as much, or that I think should also be paid attention to? I'd say that there are metrics that are slightly higher up the funnel, right? So when somebody is in that awareness or consideration stage that tie to business outcomes. And what comes to mind for me there is for your highest up the funnel stuff, so your kind of awareness efforts, I would say that, a key metric there would be consideration or top of mind availability, which is like, does someone think of my brand in a buying scenario? Like an example there would be, when I run out of toothpaste and I go to the store, I immediately think of like Crest. That's an easy association. So that's one metric, top of mind availability. And then the other that's sort of like a mid funnel, maybe when you're in that real consideration phase, at least for B2B advertisers, is account engagement. Like, are the accounts that my business is actually interested in converting, are they engaging with my marketing? So North Star, I'd say, should always be the main thing that moves your business forward. It's normally revenue. And then you want one or two things that ladder into that, right? That can measure your efforts that are not just straight demand generation marketing efforts.
I'm probably going to put you on the spot here a little bit, if you don't mind. When it comes to consideration and top of mind, outside of focus groups and obviously engagement rates, how can marketers get that true picture of those two areas?
It's tough. It can be a bit fuzzy because you need to sort of cobble together a few sources. So I think like the gold standard would be to do some market research studies, and that takes real kind of investment and time to pull off, because you're trying to ask questions around like are people interested in this product in a future state? What do they think about it? How do they want to buy it? That type of market research would be the gold standard. And there are a number of, leading market research firms. Forrester would be one of them that comes to mind. But if you're not going to do, just a true market research report, or in addition to that, I would suggest kind of cobbling together a few other things. One would be looking at trends in spots like Google Analytics, for example, and seeing like what pages are people actually coming to, where are they coming from, right? That tells you a little bit about what their mindset is and what they're thinking about. You can also sort of see spikes in trends around, what people care about more generally. And then the other kind of supplementary tool that I would add there is, at least at LinkedIn, we have tools that we offer our advertisers that are not self-service, but our account teams will pull for you, that measure stuff like brand sentiment. And so what they do is they look at something called topic ownership. So that says, all right, I'm interested in owning this topic, at least with this audience, right? Like I want, whenever somebody talks about, human capital management, that they are thinking about Workday, for example, right? And so I'm trying to measure of every time someone speaks about that on the platform, how many times is Workday coming up, right? So, other platforms like LinkedIn have similar offerings to this. And that, I would say, if there's like 3 tiers, right? Market research is your gold standard. That's like where you're making serious investment. You'd also use supplementary tools like a Google Analytics. And then within each platform, you could also look at kind of those sentiment and topic ownership tools.
Totally agree. And one of the things that I've been working on over the last few years in the comms space is share of voice per topic, and looking at it from a thought leadership ownership of areas of that sort of share of voice on those topic outcomes.
Something that I'm thinking about right now, because I got asked this at a recent conference, is like, what do I do if I don't have a huge budget, right? Like, and my share of voice is not going to be large. And my guidance, I would say there, is just control what you can control, right? So start by measuring share of voice of an audience that you're interested in against a topic. You don't need to own the whole topic, particularly if you're a brand that's just trying to get into the space, or start with a smaller topic, right? Like owning AI right now would be an impossible quest, really, even for OpenAI. And so I would say start with a particular cut of that topic or something more specific that you want to own. So just guidance for folks who might not have unlimited marketing budgets for how do you measure share of voice effectively.
I know you recently gave a talk, and I thought it was fascinating where you split metrics into frontline metrics and business outcome metrics. So I was just wondering if you could expand a little bit more on exactly what you mean by those two terms, and then how do you marry those two up to drive and measure performance?
So business outcome metrics is like my most common refrain, I feel like, at this point. And that, as I stated, is anything that moves your business forward. So it tends to be revenue or, bookings, like pipeline generated for most businesses. Could also be something like account engagement. Share of mind could also be something that like moves your business forward, right? Those are business outcome metrics. That's like, I can see a link between that and my bottom line growing, right? Frontline metrics are sort of exactly what they sound like. They're metrics that you look at when you're on the front lines as a marketer and you're saying, like, does this piece of content resonate? Or like, is this audience like even here? Are they listening? Does this work for them? So that would be stuff more like, click-through rate or cost per click or cost per mil that really says like, hey, is this thing on? Is this working? Right? And the way that I would then parse like how you would use both of those, because it's not that the frontline metrics don't matter. They very much do. And they particularly, we think about the B2B marketer at LinkedIn a lot. They particularly matter for B2B because B2B sales cycles are super long. Like on average, the length of the sales cycle we found is about 16 months. So measuring like a deal from start to finish is super hard. You need something earlier that you're measuring. Otherwise, you can get a bit lost in the sauce. And I would say you use your frontline metrics. Those are really what your campaign managers are looking at. Those are the people who are hands to keyboard. They're firing up your campaigns and they're saying, does this piece of content work? Does this resonating with this audience, right? So you might look at that for in month, for example. how is this working right now? Or should I shut this piece of content down? Should I keep it going for a little bit longer? The business outcome metrics then are what you'd use to guide, I'd say, month over month, quarterly or yearly reviews to set, really like your top-down strategy. What channels should I be spending on and what tactics beneath those channels? But they're both very important.
Is it fair to say that your frontline metrics are a little bit like your checkpoints? You're checking on the destination of where you're going, and your business outcome is the entire map and the route that you're taking.
Yes, and I'd say that there's always going to be then mid steps that you can start to link in between the front line and the business outcome. And there are a lot of tools, and I think we'll probably get into this a little bit later in the conversation, that can help you figure out what those middle steps are. Because, having no visibility between did this piece of content work and did I close this deal is hard. But I'd say that you're exactly right that the frontline metric is hey, is this working right now? Business outcome is ultimately, what are we driving toward? And then you're trying to figure out what are the things that create the link between that first touch, let's say, and the business outcome. And one example that I would give here is, say you're a business that you're trying to drive pipeline and revenue. That's really your business outcome. And maybe you're a spot like LinkedIn marketing, where you are trying to get people to advertise on your website, but you have an app like the LinkedIn app. You see that there is some link between app installs and bookings, but you need to suss that out a little bit more. I'd say that's kind of the mid step that you're looking to uncover is on my way to this end goal that I'm driving toward, what tends to precede that,
Do you believe that actually people are becoming so obsessed with those short-term instant metrics that they are not zooming out and looking at the wider picture of how you're getting to that destination? Is that a sort of a big pitfall that you're seeing, or is that something that actually people can overcome quite quickly if they change their thinking?
Oh, they can overcome it quickly if they change their thinking. It can be hard to overcome quickly on behalf of a big organization, right? That has very structured ways of doing measurement and reporting, but it can be overcome. And I think that the key is focus on the data, right? Focus on the long term. What are you actually trying to drive? And figure out what the link is between that click-through rate, let's say, and that long-term goal, right? You might end up having pretty low click-through rates on a piece of content, but overall, you see that it is driving pipeline. There could be tons of reasons for that, right? Maybe it's something that people are no, this makes a lot of sense, right? And it kind of marinates in their brain. They don't need to overly engage with it. It's not something controversial. And there's conversion that's really strong, acquisition rates that you're driving at the end. I would say focus on the outcome, right? The click-through rate, the cost per click, those are just little signposts along the way. And you should not let that kind of obscure that the main goal is the main goal and drive toward that goal. They're not always perfectly linked, where high CTR means, high revenue driven, for example.
I think that's the brilliant explanation. And I think sadly I think we see it day to day of obsession over those sort of instant gratification metrics.
Yeah. And I think oftentimes it's because I don't really see as much that people are obsessed with the frontline instant gratification metrics when they're measuring all the way down funnel to revenue and pipeline generated. It's normally when they're not measuring that latter action that they're I need to focus on this and this is what my boss cares about. And it's because they don't have the other, And I think normally when you have a little bit more visibility on how is stuff actually converting, you're able to see that link pretty clearly and be okay, well, it's okay that the CTR here is a little bit lower because we see that this is driving conversions over time. The reason why people don't measure all the way down is because it's hard. It takes resources.
That comes from the top down, that culture of looking at the wider picture and looking at the wider goal. And how do you build that into a team? And especially if a team has very much been campaign to campaign, we need to do this for 3 months, then we need to go and do this because we need to appear to this audience. How do you create that sort of structure to enable your team to think in the longer term?
These are just kind of tried and true recommendations that I feel work not just for marketing, but in life in general. So here they are. The first would be to observe who's doing it well. Like I'm a big, you don't need to always create something so net new and bespoke and come up with your own way of doing things. Look at who's doing it really well, right? And like how they're measuring the type of content that they're putting out there, kind of the structures that they have in place. There's a lot of information on the internet that will tell you, I mean, Salesforce is beautiful, beautiful marketing, and I'll just call them out here. Like you could take a look at what's their strategy, right? There's tons of white papers and examples of the content and examples of kind of like measurement structures of famous companies like a Salesforce. And you could look at them kind of in the ads platforms like a LinkedIn or a Meta. You can see what their ads look like as well. And so that's one, is like look at who's doing it well. You don't want to necessarily be a copycat, but like you don't need to reinvent the wheel always. And it's a great way to get buy-in if you're an organization that's either just kind of behind the curve, maybe like a large company that hasn't caught up, or you're just new to this, right? So see who's doing it well. And you're not just looking at like, what content is strong. Like the reason Salesforce is because they drive massive bookings off of that, right? So that's a great example then to show your team internally and say like, hey, we're all moving toward the same goal here, right? Like we want to drive more revenue for our business. I think this could be a great way to structure it. The second kind of tried and true is, I would say, control what you can control. Start winning within your kind of plot of land that you own, and then build outward, right? Like, unless you're a CMO, it's hard to set and even if you are, it's hard to set top-down strategy that then cascades throughout an entire organization. But if one group can win and can show you exactly what they're doing kind of well, and then suggest like incremental changes that can be made either to their plot of land as it gets bigger, or to other teams that impact them. I'm thinking like if you're a demand generation team, you're like, okay, social media team, like we've been doing this and we've been seeing great results. Let's try to create a tighter link here. That's kind of the way in which I see these changes, which they shouldn't be such big changes, but they are, because they tie to like real marketing's job is to drive demand. That's about the most important job, that you can have. So they, while it might seem like, oh, it's the changing of a metric, it is meaningful to a business, and it can cause a big change in a business's results. So I'd say learn from the best and make changes that you can control, see what works, prove it out, and then move outward from there.
It sounds like a very simple and positive way to empower teams moving forward, which I think is the brilliant thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, at LinkedIn, we have this concept of, I've been here a while, and I still remember like my first day training, they taught us this concept of leverage, which is, how can you 10x the impact of everything that you do? And so sharing is like a really big thing here internally. You do something great. Can you share it with your immediate team of 10 people? Or could you make a resource that then could be shared through your entire organization? Eventually, could you publish something that's like viewed globally, right? So that I think is really a best practice in a marketing org in general, is just thinking about internal leverage while having strong opinions that are loosely held, right? So saying to people, here's what we've done, here's the impact that we've seen, and we're passing on this strategy because we think that it could be helpful to you, but also feel free to poke holes in it. Let's feel free to like have a discussion about it, because ultimately, like, we're not going to be successful, any of us, if I have blinders on and I've given you something that maybe isn't as strong as I originally thought, right? And we're not going to be successful unless we all feel good about this strategy, So I'd say like leverage, like sharing is important, but also making space for like dissenting opinion, and really listening to it.
A slight change of tack here, because obviously I'm going to throw in another aspect when we're talking about positivity, and we are talking around how AI is then going to either enhance or throw a spanner in the works of all of this.
Yeah, that's the bajillion-dollar question for everyone right now. And I think that so AI and advertising metrics, do I think that AI is going to create new metrics off the bat? Probably not. Although at this point, AI could likely do anything. But there's a few trends that I observed with AI, or just that are ground truths to kind of how it works, that I could see causing impact. The first is AI, and not just generative AI, but AI in general, the way that advertising platforms have always worked actually, is really, really good at spotting trends, right? So I feel like, even 5, 10 years ago when AI existed, but it wasn't quite as crisp as it is today, there was a lot of this like manual optimization going on, which was like, we think that this outcome is being driven. And so we're seeing these creatives resonate. And so you should do more of these creatives, right? And like at the end of the day, we were all kind of guessing, and then and that was fine, right? Like guessing is fine. And then staking a bet on that guess and seeing if it works. That's a very, very positive way of actually doing marketing. But even better is if you have good tools behind it that can help do a bit more thorough analysis of really big sets of data. So again, in the example that I gave with app installs and the correlation to like, let's say bookings, right? So you might dump all your data into an analysis tool, and you're over here on the one end observing, pipeline and revenue generation. And then at the starting line, you're observing cost per click-through rate, and you're adding in a bunch of there's all these other little conversions that are being tracked along the way. One of them might be app installs. App installs may have absolutely really no link to bookings for your business, or it might have a very strong link. And so something like AI, not even a generative AI, but just like the core of AI can tease out those links really easily in a way that it would take our best data scientists a long time to do. It would take me for freaking ever, and it wouldn't be great, right? So that's one. I think that whole trend is just going to keep, ramping up and up. And I think that's a very exciting thing. That's only positive for the industry. The second thing, and this applies more to generative AI, is I think that marketers are going to start to get better results, and they're not going to have patience for getting poor results and wasting money. There's always that whole refrain around I spend a ton on advertising. I know I'm wasting half my money, but I don't know what I'm wasting it on, right? Like generative AI can help to figure out where there's waste, figure out what the links are between all your metrics, right? That's part one that we already went through. And then write better strategies, right? That's the generative piece. That's the writing piece. And so it can say, you should be allocating against these tactics on these channels, and your copy should look exactly like this, right? Because we know that is what's proven to then drive the app install, which drives the booking. So I think new metrics will come to follow, but the first two things that I think will happen is that marketers will have a better understanding of what are the things that actually drive the outcome in the end. And then they're going to write better strategies and not really have patience for the waste. I think both things are very positive for the industry.
I think the lesson for marketers is going to be about training the prompts. And actually it's not writing the strategy, but it's writing the correct prompts and insights to get that strategy.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think until the point in which AI, which not to bring a true, Black Mirror scenario upon us, but until the point in which AI is breathing and feeling emotions in a way that a human does, and is more precise and accurate at committing every action that a human can commit for every industry in every domain, man and machine will always be needed. I have always felt quite strongly about that. You need the emotional side of a person to really think about okay, but the stats are saying this, but do we see that actually happen in society? Does this really resonate? Or do buying groups, do we think people will catch on to this type of pattern that's being suggested that we drive here? Making tweaks to strategies, even if they are written by a computer at some point, there will always really, really need to be a human element there. And that's actually what excites me about. I'm a true tech nerd. That's what excites me a lot about technology, is that we should really just be replacing the elements of our job that weren't actually serving us and we were wasting a bit of time on with things like these tools. Could this analysis be run in the background? Is it simple enough that it could be run and then spot checked by me, right? Or it could be run and I run my own analysis side by side and we look at what the combination of those data points says, right? So I don't think it's something, if we let the machine totally control things, again, unless it's thinking, breathing, feeling, it will never be better than us at actually knowing what a person wants, what motivates them, talking to customers in the field, et cetera. And all of our advertising would end up looking the same. There always needs to be that human element, not just for great analysis, but particularly for great strategy. And we see this with like, the creative, understanding, though it's pretty nascent, but the creative that's coming out from, some of the AI companies, Gen AI companies, is some of it strong, and then some of it just looks exactly like, everybody else is creative, right? And you can see that at a certain point, if you're training this thing on a data set that's finite, then the best practices start to bubble at the top and we all look the same. Like in marketing, there's a reason that difference works and stands out.
And bravery, I think, as well.
Oh,
I
yeah.
think is another thing. And I think that's going to be an interesting element that we get into, especially with creative, is if you think of those really amazing campaigns that we all know and love and can still think about, a lot of them are very brave at that zeitgeist or at that point in time. And actually then if everything's Gen AI led, are we going to lose some of that bravery and lose some of that sort of human element? So Adverity have been working very closely with you guys, and we've just added the LinkedIn revenue attribution reporting templates into our offering. It's obviously another metric for marketers to look at, and I know we've talked about a number of metrics today, but how can we make sure that we're avoiding sort of death by analysis and avoiding the focus on, oh, well, I've got another metric I need to look at and report on, and making sure, as you alluded to earlier, that we are looking at the wider outcome and not just the sort of short-term signposts?
So the revenue attribution report, what it does is it really does enable marketers to look at those business outcomes. And so the way it works is a marketer goes and they connect their CRM to LinkedIn. So it's a sort of a secure sync from Salesforce, HubSpot, Microsoft Dynamics. And then LinkedIn is analyzing, those records in the CRM and then the engagements that happen on LinkedIn. And we're saying if pipeline or if revenue that was driven to your business was influenced by LinkedIn. So that means that like a member, clicked or they viewed an ad and then that member ended up being tied to an opportunity that's either an open opportunity or it's closed one for your business. So I'd say that this falls under the true like business outcome bucket of metrics. And these are the metrics that tell us about, stuff like market fit, stuff like demand. And I'd argue that they should be the centerpiece of your kind of monthly and quarterly, both like your optimization and health check. So like for your frontline marketers actually, as well as an input to top-down strategy that would be owned, all the way up to the CMO. And right now, the revenue attribution report is kind of like a LinkedIn-centric report, right? But in the future, we're making updates so that the data that lives in revenue attribution report could be ported into a model that's a cross-channel model. So you could say, like, actually, we know there was touch points from Facebook as well. We know there was touch points from Google search, and overall, right, like what was kind of the impact of LinkedIn and then those other spots on revenue driven. But I would say like that should be kind of like, this is your North Star. And I would suggest the way in which I would suggest viewing it is for your frontline marketers, who they'll start off looking at, kind of click-through rate and cost per click, that they're maybe looking at this on like a monthly basis, and they're saying like, okay, what campaigns do we see converting, right? Like long-term, because there's a look back window. It's not like, what do we see converting today? What campaigns do we see ultimately driving revenue? What can we deduce from that? What should we be doing a little bit more of or a little bit less of? Or where do we have like open pipeline, especially for account-based marketers, like that we want to close right now? So where should we like pushing more into? And then for your top-down strategy, that's your directors all the way up to your CMO. This is where I would be looking at this as one of the main inputs to top-down strategies, like what ultimately is working, what channel and what tactic to drive, pipeline revenue.
Do you have one metric in mind that if someone's starting out, that they're starting out a new brand or they're building a challenging product to go into market, that they should really focus on in the first 6 to 9 months and go, right, I'm just going to look at this metric. This is going to give me enough of an indication of how I'm doing in market before I add in everything else?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question because, again, I said that the sales cycle tends to be 16 months. So especially if you're like a startup, right? And you're just getting out there and you're like, am I wasting my money? Or like, is this working? What I would suggest, is if you have a strong enough concept of your buyer, right? So like, I know that we think this product is going to be a fit for mid-market businesses that are about this size, or this specific list of companies. That you look at engagement from that list of companies. That to me tends to typically be the leading metric that then ends up like, if you see that going well, it will break into revenue at a certain point, right? Because if real business people are engaging with your advertising, it means they care about it for a business purpose, you know? And I would say the same thing holds for consumers. Like if you feel quite strongly like, we think this product is best fit for females of like a certain age bracket that like these things, and you see that they are engaging with your product, that is a pretty good indicator that at a certain point that's going to break, right? And is going to end up actually driving conversions for your business. So that's account engagement or just engagement with a priority audience. So not just like errant clicks, not just like a high engagement rate. It's like who I think is the right fit for my product cares about it. That's what I would suggest.
For keeping up to date with the industry, keeping your sort of finger on the pulse, no pun intended to sort of plug the LinkedIn Thought Leadership platform. Where are you sort of going? Where are the channels that you are looking at and going, actually, if I don't read this or if I don't listen to this, I feel a little bit lost when I walk into the office on a Monday morning?
So I'm a voracious consumer of industry news. So I have a few spots. I would say that like what used to be my mainstay and is still like kind of the core of what I look at are like the industry bodies, both newsletters and the .com sites and the research that they put out. So I'd say that's stuff like eMarketer, Digiday, IAB, TechCrunch, Forrester, everything from like the market research that's being put out to kind of the forecasts and the predictions that are being made about the industry. That I look at all the time, right? And you're constantly, if you subscribe to those newsletters, getting pretty strong updates on the way that the industry is going. I supplement that with, I'm a very, very big podcast listener because, I like to listen on my walk into work every morning, and then I feel like I have a primer for my day. So, shout out to eMarketer Behind the Numbers. I really like Marketecture. If you want to get quite, in the weeds and figure out like, okay, like what is really going on with third-party cookie deprecation, love Marketecture. And, I also like Morning Brew Daily or the Emerging Tech Brew newsletter series because it's a bit more bite-sized. So those are my two main like content spots would be the industry bodies for newsletters and .com stuff, and then podcasts. And then I supplement that with events, like industry events. So either going to them or just reading about them, like coverage from New Fronts, coverage from Cannes. Because if you think about that, that's like, what does every company want you to know about them? Like, what are they saying is going to be big, next year? Which means like, if you're listening to coverage of HubSpot's conference or Google's, like, it means that they're planning for that in their bottom line. They're staking a real bet on it. And then lastly, talking to customers, and that could not be more important. Talking to customers, talking to partners like yourselves. Like I work in the partnership remit and speaking to partners about Adverity. What are you seeing in the industry? What are your customers and our joint customers caring about? And then getting FaceTime with those customers, or if there's any like recordings from customers. We have, we use Gong at LinkedIn, so I can kind of listen to customers speak in their own words about like, I'm frustrated with this and I need to drive this outcome and this tool isn't working for me. That really adds that like, talk about like human EQ, like approach to designing strategy, right? It's like, why does somebody want what they want and what is sufficient to meet their needs? I think you have to get to the customer level and you can't just read about it.
I think that's fantastic. And I think if we can encourage everyone to go and have sort of 15-20 minute conversations with their customers every week, I think we'll be in a great place as an industry. Emily, thank you so much. I've absolutely loved the conversation. I would love to do this again and dive even deeper into some metrics. Thank you so much for your time.
It's my pleasure. And ditto, always down for another conversation. Appreciate it, JJ, and appreciate the partnership between LinkedIn and Adverity.